The Nevada desert wavered in the heat as midday settled over Fort Valor. A hard sun pressing on sand and steel. Recruits formed a line to draw the M17. Boots scuffing the dust while range commands clipped the air. Private Ava Morgan, 23. Stepped to the firing line with quiet posture and eyes steady. The kind of calm that comes from habit, not bravado. Heat shimmer rose off the berms as the smell of gun oil pooled around the benches today. Staff Sergeant Daniel Brooks ran the range and watched her approach. She addressed him correctly as sergeant and, on the line, offered no saluti. Only a clear request to run the drill with an M4A1, carbine fitted with the M150 RCO. Brooks gave a curt nod. The kind that means proceed within the book. Ava performed a calm press check. Verified the bolt in battery. Set the safety on. Seated the magazine and tugged to confirm. And never touched the forward assist. She slid into a prone supported position. Settled natural point of aim. Let her breathing find a steady rhythm. And took up the trigger with smooth pressure. The range voice carried the standard sequence. Load. Make ready. 5 rounds at 100 meters. Fire when ready. And the line fell into a tight silence as metal, oil, and heat seemed to hold their breath with her. The last crack faded, and the range went still at 100 meters. Staff Sergeant Daniel Brooks lifted his binoculars and found the group drawn into a single dark hole. He called ceasefire and walked the sequence by the book. Ava removed the magazine, locked the bolt to the rear, checked the chamber by sight and touch, set the safety on, showed clear, and stepped off the line. Brooks kept the glass on the target and asked with a calm where she learned to shoot. Ava answered without heat that a grandfather had drilled breath control and patience into long days on a bolt action. And the words settled like dust in the heat. No one on the berms laughed. Brass cooled against the bench, and the smell of oil hung. By morning, chow the room thinned out over powdered eggs and burnt coffee at 6:30 a.m. 5 into 1 moved from table to table. A quiet current that pushed past small talk. Some wrote it off as luck and stared at their trays too long. Others said nothing because they had watched the stance, the breathing, and strict muzzle discipline. And their eyes showed a new respect. Sergeant Ethan Morales, from Advanced Marksmanship, arrived before the line went hot and positioned himself behind the shooters where he could watch hands and feet. He cared less about noise and more about how bodies managed recoil and time. Ava Morgan stepped to her lane and treated the carbine like a tool, not a talisman. The dust hung low, while Morales waited for the small tells that reveal training. On the signal, she ran a clean speed reload. She dropped the empty magazine, indexed the fresh one from the pouch, drove it straight into the well, tugged to confirm the seat, and rode the bolt with control while using the bolt catch when appropriate. When a stage malfunction came up, she answered with tap, rack, reassess without adding drama or extra movement. Muzzle awareness stayed strict, and her trigger discipline never slipped. Finger where it belonged until she was ready to press. Ava's stance was efficient rather than pretty. Her weight sat where it needed to be. Natural point of aim found itself, and every motion seemed to remove a wasted inch. Morales noted the habit of quick safety checks and the absence of any needless touch on the forward assist. He watched her breathing settle to the work instead of the moment. After the relay, he pulled her aside for a short word folded into the noise of brass and boots. She spoke of Montana mornings working a bolt action, of breath held just enough, of a trigger pressed like a promise. The platoon's mood shifted by degrees while they policed brass at 7:15 a.m. The jokes ran out of air and were replaced by a quieter attention that felt like respect. Captain Julian Price sat behind a plain desk at Fort Valor with a thin file open, the kind that says more by what it lacks. Private Ava Morgan stepped in, halted, and rendered a proper salute, then held a steady position at attention. The room carried the smell of paper and recycled air while the clock ticked toward 2:30 p.m. Price scanned enlistment dates, range cards, and nothing that explained a grouping that made a line go quiet. He asked about skill build, where M4S are not part of daily life. And she answered with calm about hunting rifles. Breath habits. And a trigger pressed the same way every time. Her tone was level and practical, never eager to impress. Price watched how her eyes mapped the door and the corners without drifting. How her weight rested evenly, as if braced for motion. The quiet told him more than the words. He closed the file and released her with a nod that carried neither praise nor rebuke. She stepped off smartly, closing the door with the care of someone who respects spaces that are not hers. Price looked at the empty chair and thought about the range report, the binoculars, and a platoon that had stopped laughing. Something here lived outside the paperwork, something shaped by time and small routines. And he decided to keep watching. The convoy rolled to a stop, and the parade field tightened as if the air itself held a breath. Brigadier General Caroline Shaw stepped out with a single silver star bright on her shoulder, the kind of quiet authority that stills chatter without a word. Captain Julian Price met her and delivered a crisp report about a recruit who had outshot expectations. And the general asked to see the skill proven on the line. Flags snapped in the wind, while the company shifted toward the range with a focused calm. The range safety officer reset the lane and moved the cycle from cold to hot by the book. He cleared the area, verified safe directions, and confirmed empty chambers before any loading happened. Commands moved through the formation like checkpoints instead of noise, and every soldier knew where eyes and muzzle belonged. Dust lifted in the heat and settled on boots, benches, and steel. Private Ava Morgan drew an M4A1 carbine fitted with the M150 RCO and treated the rifle with the same measured care she used on day one. She ran a press check, verified the bolt and battery, placed the selector on safe, seated the magazine and tugged to confirm, and kept the muzzle locked on the safe lane. The sequence came next in clean steps. Load. Make ready. Then hold for fire when ready as the range went still. Sun hammered the berms. A flag cracked in the dry wind. And Ava matched her breathing to the quiet that follows respect. Private Ava Morgan settled behind an M4A1 carbine with the M150 RCO glinting in the sun. She slid into a prone-supported position and built a steady natural point of aim. Breathing eased into a natural respiratory pause, and trigger prep followed with smooth pressure. The range cadence moved in clean order. Load. Make ready. Fire when ready. And the air tightened around the lane. At 100 meters, the first string printed center and tight. She shifted to 200 and used the ACOG BDC hold with a slight hold-off to answer a light left-to-right push. Then pressed each shot the same way. At 300, she stayed with the BDC ladder, watched the sight settle in rhythm with her breath, and rode the trigger to a clean break. Group stayed honest and compact without heroics. Just work done right. The command rolled across the line. Cease fire. And the range exhaled. Ava removed the magazine, locked the bolt to the rear, checked the chamber by eye and touch, set the safety on, and showed clear before lifting from the mat. The range safety officer logged the run while heat shimmered above the berms. Brigadier General Caroline Shaw watched through glass with a calm face, and the quiet that followed felt like respect rather than surprise. Ceasefire rolled across the lane, and the heat seemed to settle back onto the sand. Ava removed the magazine, locked the bolt to the rear, checked the chamber by sight and touch, set the safety on, and showed clear to the range safety officer. The rifle came off the line in a neat arc with the muzzle held in the safe direction. Brass clicked against the mat while the smell of oil and hot dust lingered. She walked toward Brigadier General Caroline Shaw with measured steps and the calm of someone who respects the uniform more than the moment. At the proper distance, she came to a halt, raised her hand, and rendered a salute suited to an officer of that rank. As her sleeve shifted, a faint tattoo showed on the inside of her forearm. The outline was a bird in flight with talons open, worn and pale, the kind of family mark that is memory rather than declaration. The general's eyes paused there, not long enough to draw attention, but long enough to register something old. She held her face steady for the line of soldiers, and leaned a fraction closer, so only air could carry the thought. One word left her like a memory returning. Black Talons. The tone was quiet, more recognition than surprise. And then the discipline of the moment returned as if it had never moved. Ava lowered her hand and waited. Posture exact. The general kept the businesslike cadence that matches a hot range with an audience, offered a brief commendation that sounded like an observation, and asked for a meeting after hours. It would be in the office, behind a coded door, and it would stay off the rumor mill. The rifles went safe and racks closed with a heavy clack behind them. The sun fell a few degrees toward late afternoon, and the wind tugged at the flags. Soldiers drifted back to tasks and checklists. Ava logged her run, signed where she needed to sign, and stepped away from the benches. The heat, the quiet, and a single old word trailed her across the dust. The corridor was quiet as evening settled over the headquarters building at Fort Valor. A coded door unlocked with a soft click, and Private Ava Morgan stepped inside, then centered herself at attention. Brigadier General Caroline Shaw sat behind a plain desk, expression even, the room ordered and spare. The hum of an old vent mixed with the faint smell of paper and oil, and it felt like the walls held long memories. The general placed a thin folder on the desk with a stamped warning that left no doubt about its status. She opened it to a black and white photograph of Sergeant Robert Morgan in jungle fatigues, with an XM-21 balanced along his forearms. The face in the photo was young, but the eyes were not, and the carbine-length sling cut a careful line across the frame. A map corner peeked from the folder, its edges worn by years. A knock sounded, and Colonel Walter Briggs, retired, entered with the steady gait of a man who has carried weight for a long time. He spoke with the easy economy of someone who has no need to sell a story, and laid out an exfil that lasted 3 days through wet heat and bad ground. He gave a distance for a shot, 847 yards, and said a life had turned because of it. He mentioned a Medal of Honor recommendation that never saw daylight, and let the silence explain the rest. Ava listened without trying to fill the space, and felt small pieces line up in her mind. Long breaths on cold mornings, patience behind a scope, the way stillness lets a picture settle. All of it had come from somewhere real. General Shaw slid an envelope across the desk and said there would be a follow-up meeting the next day. Details to be discussed in the proper setting. The message was simple. This path was about discipline and responsibility, not legend. Evening settled over the post chapel, and the glass doors reflected a thin line of orange. Private Ava Morgan sat in the back pew with a candle flickering near the rail, and let the quiet do its steady work. The room smelled of wax and old wood, and the long day unwound from her shoulders. She replayed the photograph, the file, the weight of names that did not need to be spoken. Chaplain Michael Ward stepped in with the soft stride of someone used to silence. He sat beside her and listened while she shaped a fear she had kept small, the fear of becoming only what others wanted. He reminded her that choice is a duty too, and that stillness is not weakness when it is chosen. The clock on the wall ticked past 9:20 p.m., and the moment felt simple and clear. Ava rose with a steadier breath and nodded to the chaplain in thanks. Outside, the air was cooler, and the parade field lights hummed like a low chord. She pulled her phone, found the number for Colonel Walter Briggs, retired, and left a clean message that she was ready to follow the hard road. Then she squared her shoulders and walked back toward the barracks with a step that sounded like a promise. Brigadier General Caroline Shaw met Ava in a small briefing room with a window that faced the motor pool. She slid a sealed envelope across the table and explained the path in plain terms. This was an open door, not a shortcut. Ava stood at attention and listened to each step as if counting clicks on a turret. First came reassignment to 11B Infantry after completion of Basic or OSU, a move that would place her inside the community that lives with the rifle every day. Next came a slot at the U.S. Army Sniper Course at Fort Moore, Georgia, with blocks on ballistics, range estimation, target detection, and fieldcraft. Passing that would not be the end. It would unlock assessment and training at a classified mountain site in Colorado that supports special operations units. The general spoke of time in service and time in grade, of how rank is earned over years and not moments. Private becomes specialist or corporal when performance and time meet. Then sergeant, when leadership and consistency hold under pressure, the message landed with weight that felt right. Skill matters most when it survives the grind of real timelines and real standards. Ava opened the envelope, read the orders, and signed where required. She rendered a clean salute, received a brief return, and gathered the copy for her records. The clock on the wall slid past 3:15 p.m. as she stepped into the hallway. She walked out with a steadier breath, not elated, but ready to carry the responsibility that comes with a correct road. Before sunrise, the flight line glowed in sodium light, and the C-130 Hercules droned at idle. Private Ava Morgan climbed the ramp, took a canvas seat along the fuselage, and tightened the lap belt until it sat firm. The cargo bay smelled of hydraulic fluid and cold metal. When the aircraft lifted, the world outside turned from black to slate and then to pale gold over the ridgeline. They landed at a mountain site in Colorado that did not carry a sign and did not ask for questions. Air hit like a wall when the ramp dropped, thin and clean with a bite that lived in the lungs. The first week belonged to altitude. PT came early. Runs and rucks in air that made legs heavy, followed by medical checks and hydration briefings that everyone took seriously. Marksmanship blocks started once bodies began to settle. The cadre issued the Mk13 Mod 7 inches, 300 Winchester Magnum, and paired it with the Schmidt and Bender 5. They built data on density, altitude, and learned to read wind in mills from grass, snow dust, and distant banners. Coriolis got a short block at a basic level, not as a trick, but as a factor that sits quietly in the math. Urban work followed on rooftops and through stairwells. Teams built observation posts, cut small hides, and practiced angle shots from positions that looked wrong until the body learned them. When the scenario fit, the glass shifted to a loopholed Mark 5 HD, and the rhythm stayed the same. Movement was slow, notes were clean, and nothing broke the skyline without purpose. Fieldcraft ran long days. Camouflage meant color, shine, shadow, and shape checked against terrain until the outline vanished. Range estimation came through the reticle with careful bracketing and simple math, then confirmed with a laser only after the call. Stalking lanes taught silence, patience, and how to let a picture settle before it tells you what matters. Safety never moved to the background. Cold to hot and back again stayed by the book, with muzzles managed, bolts open, and chambers checked by eye and touch. Radios used brevity and plain words. The cold bit at fingers and the metal felt dry. And in that thin air, the work grew steady and human. Night settled over the mountain range, and the line went quiet under red lights. Private Ava Morgan lay behind the Mk13 Mod 7 inches 300 Winchester Magnum with a Schmidt and Bender 5 set for clarity. An AN PVS 30 sat as a clip-on in front of the optic, so 0 stayed true while the world turned green. She checked focus, parallax, and a natural point of aim, then built a dope card for the air that night. Separate lanes, ran carbine work. Ava moved with an M4A1 while a PVS-14 rode her helmet and an IR laser painted targets only nods could see. Light and noise discipline ruled every step and breath. The team flowed around corners with rifles low ready until a positive read allowed a rise. Safety stayed first in the stack. Every shot required PID before press, with ROE briefed and confirmed on the net. Radio calls were short and plain, built from brevity words and acknowledgments, not wasted seconds. Muzzle direction never drifted from safe sectors, and fingers stayed clear until the moment mattered. The cadre added a stress shoot that started with sprints, sandbags, and burpees until the pulse hammered. Ava dropped to prone, slowed her breath, and let the reticle settle, then sent clean rounds that held the steel. Master Sergeant Victor Adams watched without ceremony and marked steadiness over points. The night ended with rifles cleared and records logged. Just another shift done right, because small rules were kept. The wind turned in small eddies across the valley as the cadre set the line for 1,000 yards. Private Ava Morgan settled behind the Mk13 Mod, 7 inches. 300 Winchester Magnum with a Schmidt & Bender 5 and built her position one contact point at a time. Sergeant Noah Green lay on the glass beside her and read the Mirage in mils. Offering up 1. 7 mil and right 0. 4 for the first shot. Ava dialed elevation, held the right correction, trimmed parallax, and let the reticle come to rest where breath meets patience. Her body found the ground the way it had been taught for months. Toes dug light, rear bag firm. Stock set deep into the pocket of her shoulder, and her cheek settled until the sight picture stopped drifting. She pressed through the wall and kept the press moving while the rifle recoiled in a straight line. Follow through held the reticle on target long enough to see trace bend in the wind. Time stretched in the space a bullet needs to go that far. A faint puff of dust blinked near the plate, and then the steel answered with a clean ring that rolled back across snow lines and rock. Green confirmed the call and watched her reset without hurry. Eyes soft on the edges of the scope rather than the center. The net carried short words, acknowledgments, and nothing extra. Master Sergeant Victor Adams stood a step behind and watched the parts that never make highlight reels. Muzzle discipline never wandered. PID stayed the rule, and the radio cadence matched the brief. He logged the impact and gave a small nod that meant enough and nothing more. The line went quiet in the way good work goes quiet, and the relief that followed felt earned rather than loud. Years later, the Montana sky felt wider than she remembered. Sergeant Ava Morgan stood before the stone that read Robert Morgan U.S. Army and let the wind move through the wheat like slow water. Her uniform sat neat and quiet on her frame. The ground smelled of damp grass and a hint of dust that carried a memory of metal and oil. She knelt and pressed a small pin shaped like a bird with open talons into the soil at the base of the marker. The earth gave just enough and took the weight like it understood. She rested her palm on the cool granite and thought of early mornings when breath was the first lesson and patience was the second. The years of training, the courses, the ranges, all felt like a long line drawn from those simple rules. She rose and looked over the field, watching the light shift along the rows. The air was clean and the sound of the wind had the same rhythm as the pause before a good shot. She brought her hand to her brow in a steady salute, then lowered it and turned toward the road. Legacy lives in small habits, she thought, in the even breath and the steady hand, and she walked away with a calm that felt like a promise kept.